Welcome everyone. I'm Steve Bynum, senior producer at WBEZ Radio and former board member of the Chicago Cultural Alliance. And it is my pleasure to welcome all of you to Chicago Cultural Alliance's Giving Tuesday Roundtable. And the purpose of this gathering is to really focus a spotlight on the challenges that these various organizations, our members, are facing, but to do so within the context of an intimate conversation, and to do it through the prism of storytelling. Because when it's all said and done, that is exactly what the members of the Alliance, what they do. They tell stories. I want to start by talking about how personally storytelling really resonates with me, especially as one who works in the creative field. I find that you cannot change people's minds or impact them necessarily always with facts, but you can through the heart and through the arts and through culture. That is the gateway to appealing to people's hearts, to reach their minds. And these institutions have done this over the generations. And it's a legacy and a heritage that we don't take lightly. And these organizations and institutions, they unify us and build a sense of community. And it takes away the otherness that all too often in these days we've all had to face. I'm reminded of the Roman playwright Terence, who in the 2nd century BC wrote, "I am human, and I think nothing human is alien to me." And I believe those words are at the heart of what the Chicago Cultural Alliance does, and what our members do, and what these panelists do in their daily lives and in their work. So without any more delay, I would like to have the panelists introduce themselves and say a little bit about who they are and the work they do. And we'll begin with Cairo from the Hellenic Museum.
Hi there. My name is Cairo, and I'm the manager of special events for the National Hellenic Museum in Chicago. We're in the West Loop in Greektown. And as you can all imagine, I'm sure being an events manager looks a little bit different in 2020 than it did before. So now I joke often that I've gone to YouTube University this year, and my job has shifted a lot into producing videos and online content as we face the challenges of 2020, which largely involves how we tell our stories in a different way.
And we're also joined by Rosa Gallagher from Dankhaus. Rosa.
Hi, I'm so happy to join everyone. My name is Rosa Gallagher, and I am the museum director at the Dankhaus German American Cultural Center, which is a German cultural center in the Lincoln Square neighborhood of Chicago on the north side. If you take the CTA, it's just off the Western Brown Line, which has a large segment of the Berlin Wall. So it's a historically German neighborhood. Lots of German immigrants were there in decades previous. So we have a museum and gallery, and we do lots of public events. And we also have a German language school for all ages and proficiency levels at the Dankhaus. And as the museum director, I handle tours, events, and during COVID, fundraising, and lots of other different things. So my job has changed a lot, and I'm guessing a lot of the other panelists have too. So I'm interested to hear what we've all got to say.
Can't wait for that. Thank you so much, Rosa. And Jennifer Kim from the Peace School, please introduce yourself.
Thank you, Steve. Yeah, Jennifer Kim, I'm the director of the Peace School. We're a nonprofit that's been in the city since '72. And there's really two sides to what we do. One side is about teaching programs to build community and to create peace for the individual and for the world. We do breathing meditation and yoga and things like that. So you might wonder, what does that have to do with the Cultural Alliance? Well, another part of what we do is we are the founders of Peace Day in Chicago. That's an event we founded in 1978, about 3 years prior to the UN International Day of Peace. And that event has turned into something much bigger. The event itself is all about bringing all cultures and communities together.
Thank you so much, Jennifer. And I should also add that as a producer of the WBEZ program Worldview, we also featured Peace Day on many occasions. So it's good to have you here tonight. It's good to have you here. And so Daniella Carrero is with us from DAMA. Please tell us what DAMA stands for, Dannilda.
Yes, sure. Well, hello, everyone. Yes, my name is Daniella Correa, and I am the public relations part of DAMA. DAMA stands for Dominican American Midwest Association. And so, talking about the mission of the organization, we are headquartered in Chicago, but we serve Dominicans and Dominicans Americans in all the Midwest region of the United States. A big part of our mission is to address the needs of Dominican Americans in the US and also in the Dominican Republic, however we can. But also a big part of our mission is to educate on our culture. Here in the Midwest of the country, we usually have programs throughout the years. Most of these are educational. So it is to do a lot of research, to bring resources to Dominicans, but it is also to bring our culture to those of the population, especially in Chicago, who wants to learn more about the Dominican Republic.
Really appreciate having you here. And finally, Mathew Holloway from the Bronzeville Historical Society. Please introduce yourself.
Hi, everyone. My name is Mathew Holloway. It's a pleasure to meet everybody. I am with the Bronzeville Historical Society, which is an African-American historical society that really seeks to preserve, document artifacts, and just cultural practices of Black Chicagoans, particularly in the Bronzeville neighborhood. So my work intersects with the Bronzeville Historical Society because I'm interested in how storytelling can be a tool for relationship building, cross-culturally, also within the context of the African-American community in building cultural legacy and practices.
Obviously, we are not face-to-face, and we're not able to have that personal human connection as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. But while I think initially we thought the pandemic could mean the end of things, we are finding more and more that it has become the beginning of things. So maybe if we could just go around the table, you can talk about what your thoughts were in February, March, April, and May, and what you thought the future would look like compared to the adjustments you've made and where you are now.
It's interesting that the time frame that you talked about, actually, my story in particular, is a little bit odd, I think. This is less of the museum specific and just me. I was actually hired in January, and we had our first big event on March 5th that I ran as the event manager for the museum. And a week later, the event was on a Thursday, and the following Friday, we all went home to start working from home. And at the time, we're going to work from home through next week, and then we'll see what happens. And very quickly, it became apparent that it was going to be longer than that. But I think it's given us an opportunity to re-examine some of the ways we engage with people, and it's given us an opportunity to reach people we ordinarily wouldn't, because it has allowed us to do things on, my job has become largely video production, which is not something that I had a background in before. So it's been a lot of learning, which has been exciting. But we've gotten a lot of people engaging with us in our videos in different parts of the country or people in different parts of the world, which has been a really amazing thing to see. But I think we've evolved from that timeout pause mentality and shifted into two things. One, how do we continue to exist right now and engage with people right now? But I also think the crucial secondary part of that is, what are the things that we've started doing now that we want to carry forward even when we can go back to being all together again? And I think this time has given us, with the right perspective, an opportunity to reassess some of the things that we do and find ways to reach people beyond when we can be back together again in person.
Thank you, Jennifer. And Rosa, tell us about what it was like for you, especially considering that your institution makes connections to Europe, to another country, just like Dannilda's and Cairo's. And so the COVID-19 pandemic, obviously, it was a global phenomenon. So how was it affecting people, let's say your contacts in Europe, and were you keeping in touch, and did that in any way factor into how you were trying to move forward during that time?
Yeah, so the person that immediately comes to mind as far as being in Germany and Europe is my mom, who lives in Germany. And so I grew up here in the United States with my dad, but I'm close with her. And so it was actually really strange to be experiencing the same thing as her across the ocean. And so that was kind of cool. It kind of kept us connected. And I know that was the same for a lot of the families that come to the Dankhaus. We have a lot of families of, you know, people in their 30s and 40s with kids that come to our German language classes. And that's something I kind of bonded with them over for the first time. I normally don't really interact with the parents in the language school, me being the museum director. So that was really cool. What I guess wasn't cool, like so many things about the COVID-19 pandemic, was those first couple of weeks where you didn't know these routines. You didn't know, you weren't comfortable yet with the Zoom and the this and the that. And we were afraid of not being employed anymore. And so, I mean, even though it's November now, I feel like we still really aren't in that routine that I was talking about. There are people who still, you know, are having their first time on Zoom or their first time on Google Meet now. So we're kind of trying to each day bring more and more people on board, because with this second or third or whatever wave we're on right now, it doesn't seem like there's going to be any way back. So we're trying to reach more people and teach them the ways of doing virtual programming going forward.
Thank you very much for that, especially sharing about your own personal story with your mom. Thank you. Dannilda, your museum represents the culture and history of a country that is also an island, but a people in particular. And being of Afro descent, there's a deep, rich history, a beautiful history, but also a history of marginalization, a marginalization that you can identify with African Americans here in the United States. And so as you began to hear the news about the pandemic, especially back in the Dominican, what were your thoughts and how did that factor into your work here?
Yeah, sure. So, and just to clarify, we don't have a physical location. So we usually have just events throughout the years.
So you were virtual from the beginning. You had to jump on everybody.
We were ahead of the game. Yes. No, but actually, to answer your question, Steve, and I really, really like the first time when you asked it, how you spoke about, in the general sense, the reinventing or something new. I don't remember your exact words, but I really like that, because to me, I think that 2020, I know that we talk a lot about all these issues that we have been having, not just the pandemic, but other issues, right? Globally. But also 2020, I see it as a year of reinventing. That's what I have been seeing it from the beginning of learning. It has been a year of learning for a lot of us.
Thank you so much. You perfectly transitioned into another large point, and it's about resilience. There's a saying, right, that necessity is the mother of invention. And so all of those plans that we've made, those sort of future things that we want to do or think about doing, or one day we might, well, now it's the bricks come down on you and you don't have a choice. It's either innovate or die, right? It's either, you know, be creative, be inventive, use your imagination, or that's the end of it. And so if maybe briefly you can, all of you, talk about those ways where you actually had to stretch those creative muscles and begin to really do things differently, but then how that also sort of changed your focus. Mathew, let's start with you.
Yeah, I wanted to connect with Dannilla's point. To your point about, you know, sort of about invention and sort of really great opportunity to take advantage of it. But I would even argue that sort of crises is the great mother of great change, right? And so now we have an enormous opportunity to really think some cultural norms and practices about our work lives, about our cultural lives, our social lives. So it's a really prime opportunity. And I would think it's not even about sort of innovation, but reassessment and reexamination. I've had the great fortune of living in different countries, and I think coming back to the States, you really get to see America and your country from a different lens. And we tend in this country to kind of move at a speed of like 2.0, faster than we can even go sometimes. And we often interpret that as being effective and efficient. And I think now we're learning being fast and moving fast doesn't necessarily mean you're moving efficiently. And sometimes having a slower pace to allow more thinking and planning and processing really allows for us to really be more intentional about our work and making sure, are we actually making the mark? Because so many organizations, so many people are so concerned with just getting it done. And now we have opportunity to get it done well.
Going along with what both Dannilda and Mathew were just talking about, the part about the connections that we're making. And Dannilda, you being able to connect with your country and people coming together, and how we've done things that we never would have imagined. And so, you know, that kind of goes with the other side of what we do, because we teach breathing meditation. So it is all about us as individuals taking that pause, because we do live at that 2.0 life, right? Like Mathew's talking about, many of us do live it like, you know, what's next, what's next? And we need to take that self pause. And I think this has caused all of us globally, collectively, to take this pause.
As a matter of fact, Chicago Cultural Alliance, we've had our Mosaic event at the Hellenic Museum on more than one occasion. And this event that we're doing now is the Alliance's way of rethinking that yearly funder. But talk about the Hellenic Museum and also the ways that you've had to get innovative and creative in order to survive.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm trying to synthesize my thoughts into the most concise way possible. But quick, like to kind of continue on what both you both have just touched on, both Mathew and Jennifer, something I think has helped me personally. I guess I'll talk about me a little bit and then zoom out to NHM, is that this has really helped me learn to be very intentional and very clear about what my goals are for any project that I do. Kind of talking about how like everything about this is learning and it's all new and we're taking the time to figure out what we're doing, but it has forced me, which I think is good, to make sure that I'm very intentional about, like, we have started producing videos and we put videos up almost every week now, which is so not what we used to do at all. And it's forced me to be really thoughtful about the programming we put up, of like, what is our goal? Who are we trying to reach? Like, what's the point of this? Like, why are we doing what we're doing? We're not just doing things now because it's what we do, because it's what we've always done. Because, you know, we've had the game changed on us in so many ways. It's an opportunity. I also really liked what Dannilda was saying about how it's reinventing things. Because we've had the game change so intensely, it gives us the space to kind of re-examine why we do what we do, because now it's not, we do this because we do it every year. It's, what is the point of this? What does it serve? And how do we do that in a different way now, since we have to? To speak about what the National Hellenic Museum has been doing, I do a mythology series now where I read mythologies stories to kids, because so much of what we used to do involved field trips and things like that, and we can't reach people that way in the way that we used to. So now I do a video every other week where I just kind of sit down in front of my webcam and I tell a story. We are focusing on how to connect with those people who aren't right in front of us all the time in a big way that I think we will carry forward. Actually, this is the first place that I'm saying this publicly, but we're going to launch a podcast in December now for the National Hellenic Museum. Like, we're thinking about new ways to tell our stories and the ways in which we tell them in a way that has been challenging, no doubt, but has forced us to be really clear about why we're doing what we're doing, what's the point of what we're doing, what's the story we're telling, and creative ways to do that, that I believe and hope we will carry forward beyond this, even when we can get together again. I really do think, I mean, my job title is manager of special events. I do think the future of events is hybrid events. Is this maybe just a slight? I think that going forward, I don't think that we're going to go back to always having things in person that never have an online accessibility option. I do think this has been a lesson in the power of hybridization and technology. So hopefully, even when we can be in person together, these events that we've all done will start to incorporate elements that allow people in different places to also participate and engage. And I think that's really powerful when you do it well and you do it intentionally.
I'm so glad you brought that up, that last point you were making, Cairo, about not going back to just plain old in person like you did before. And I had one experience earlier in the summer that really made that clear to me. So we did a virtual museum tour, which I was like, okay, this is just going to be a regular museum tour, except I'm going to be holding my phone, doing the script. And it was with a group of young people, a group of students, and it was hosted or presented through a collaboration with the Mayor's Office for People with Disabilities, as well as Chicago Public Schools. And at the end, I walked them through the building and did the whole tour, and they were asking about accessibility of the building. And I realized I had to think about, for one of the first times in my career at the Dankhaus, which floors have accessible bathrooms, which ones don't, how, and I had to go through all this mental process that I hadn't really done before, which is embarrassing to say, but also I never would have even met these students and had these questions posed to me if it hadn't been a virtual tour that they could all do. The other things I was thinking about as other people were talking was one lesson that I kind of got out of this is like a two-pronged lesson that's sort of contradictory in a way, because on the one hand, the financial downturn that we briefly took there at the beginning of COVID made us start to think a lot more long-term. We started focusing a lot more on fundraising and, thinking, all right, we need to plan cautiously for the future. And of course, no one would say that's a bad thing. But on the other hand, I think that this unexpected, somewhat quickly transpiring pandemic in the beginning that happened did have a certain silver lining, I'm sure, for anyone. On February 28th, we had launched a GoFundMe for $50,000 to pay to install the Chicago Brauhaus bar in our second floor multi-purpose room, which I think if we had had superpowers and seen forward a couple of weeks, there's no way we would have launched that on February 28th. But it was successful. We got it funded by fall, and the Brauhaus is now in the Dankhaus, and everyone loves it from the virtual tours and very limited in-person visits that we've done there. And I'm just really glad that we were sort of forced into that and didn't have a choice, or didn't have the premonition, which would have scared us off.
That's Rosa Gallagher from Dankhaus. I'm Steve Bynum, and this is the Chicago Cultural Alliance's Giving Tuesday Roundtable. And before you spoke, Rosa, Cairo was talking about stories and storytelling. And essentially, that is at the heart of what you all do. You are the repository of culture, heritage, and history of not only people, but world events, global events that have affected us all. And going back to the time where humans first gathered around the fire, at the discovery of fire, we found that stories, somehow they strengthen us, they warn us, they give us wisdom, they somehow build community and a sense of ourselves. And so each of you have origin stories individually, and certainly the institutions that you represent have their own origin stories. Talk about the importance of story. Mathew, we'll start with you.
It's an interesting experience for me because my story has been learning, my journey of storytelling within my own life experience has been learning to love my story. So coming from a Mississippi Delta, so much is written and told and stereotyped about people from rural America. And I had to learn how to unpack that social conditioning and those inherited beliefs to really find beauty in my own community. And now I'm so proud to be where I'm from because we have such a rich history and culture of storytelling, culture development in music, food, the arts. And I get the wonderful opportunity of informing people around the world who I am and where I come from. And I think for me, stories are so beautiful. To what your point earlier, it is the cultural foundation of our lives. It's how we see ourselves, it's how we interpret the world and others. How I see storytelling being used is really for cross-cultural engagement. Now more than ever, really, we have to really engage our stories as a tool for connecting with others. And so much of our national history, our local origins, our family stories, are often rooted in the stereotypes, the misperceptions of others, and we have consequently created a human hierarchy of value. And if we really want to deconstruct that, then we really have to engage those heartfelt stories that make us who we are, and the stories that we've inherited about who we're supposed to be and how we're supposed to act towards other people based upon our status in society. And so I think storytelling is the medium through which we can humanize each other. It is the story that can send someone to war. It is stories that can inspire people to want to get married, to fall in love, to dream, to be sad. It is who we are at the root of our being. And I think if we really want to think about cross-cultural engagement in the 21st century, post-COVID, then it is the opportunity to really engage the story.
Stories are a human thing. You know, you mentioned this at the beginning, where something about, you can get to anyone through the heart. And that's really what stories are, right? I think that, the human things are the ones that we need in order to survive and get through really tough times in life for all of us. I used to think growing up that I was a very strong person as a child and teenager, that I could do it all alone and by myself. And as an adult, looking back and also in current times, I have learned a very important lesson that actually human relationships are extremely important for survival, extremely important. Whenever I see someone who's suffering versus someone who's doing really well in their life, and in the sense of emotionally, spiritually, mentally, I always see that the human factors are the one that makes a difference, right, when you have relationships. And how does the concept of story comes into this? Well, you don't have to wait for a moment to hear or to say a story. We are talking to people all the time. Those are stories that you're telling maybe almost on a daily basis. And it is very powerful because that is how we connect. And that is how we get to understand each other, how we get to learn about each other, how we get to respect each other, because sometimes you will look at another culture or someone who has a different of opinion from you, and you think, or you think in a bad way, or you are unethical, or you are, I don't know, a mean person or something negative. But if you hear the story of their background, of their thinking, then you somehow think, oh, wow, I understand where you're coming from. I no longer think that you are this or that. You learn to respect the other person. And so I think that's where the power of story is. And, something, being in the times that we're being, I feel that in the last 10 years, we have gotten really sensitive when we hear difference of opinions. And to me, it's something a little bit sad, because it's almost like we're not willing to listen to each other, not understanding that we need to listen to each other. And that is the whole power of stories. And a lot of social issues that we have, we can learn little by little to resolve and connect them if we are willing to reach out and to listen to people and also give stories.
I have to say though, when I first, when I think about storytelling, it just reminds me of when I first came to the Peace School. This is going back a lot of years. And the late founder, he was Korean. We could make movies about his life. He was a martial art master. He was a peacemaker. He had so many aspects to his life. And he taught us about 5,000 years ago in Asia, and this and this and this. And when we were volunteers, he wanted us to give the whole story to whoever called the Peace School, and starting from 5,000 years ago. So that always comes, when I hear storytelling, that always comes to my mind, like, boy, have times changed, from where we started as an organization. And now, here for this year's Peace Day, we made like a 3-minute story, history of Peace Day in Chicago, which is just, since 1978 up until now. We put that together in a little 3-minute video, and how we started from this, starting 5,000 years ago, and like a 15-minute hello when someone called in. But I have to say just really briefly that since I teach a breathing meditation class, and it's all about discussion and learning together and practicing together, and what I learned over the years of teaching it is that what really touches people is when I share some little story about the way things happen for me.
Creating empathy.
Yeah, exactly. And people connect to that. So it's a long lesson to learn, but it really does come down to, if it's not personal for me, it is like you said at the beginning, Steve, rattling off facts. That is boring. Who wants to hear that?
Cairo, I'm thinking about stories. I mean, my goodness, you talk about the Greeks and story. I mean, how far back do you want to go? So just take it away. I mean, you can run this thing.
Yeah, this is what I was really excited to talk about actually on this. This is kind of a personal favorite thing of mine. To talk a little bit about my story for a hot sec, just for contextualizing this. Before I started doing events for the museum, I actually was a theater person. I was a stage manager before in my past life. So I did theater. That was what I did before I came to the museum. And I also studied history. So doing events at a museum kind of ended up being that like little perfect, combination of the two things that I did before, which was lovely and not what I expected. And I'm so grateful it's where everything turned out. But I think theater, we've all kind of talked about storytelling and empathy. I think theater at its finest has that, it really ingrained in me that capacity for storytelling to breed empathy and what that means in a way that I've carried forward beyond, even though I no longer do theater anymore as my profession, that has stayed with me. This is going to go like way zoom out philosophy life view. So I apologize in advance for that. But I think there's something kind of,
go for it.
I think there's something kind of magical about storytelling in so many ways, but I'm going to talk about the Greek mythology, or like those ancient Greek plays that we still tell. And my kind of worldview is in that I've always loved the classics. I've always been a big old nerd. And I've always loved like Shakespeare and things like that. I guess it's the history person in me as well. But in a way, I feel like these stories that we tell, right? These stories that are thousands of years old, we see something of ourselves in them, or we wouldn't keep telling them.
The thing that's beautiful about the organizations that the Chicago Cultural Alliance represents is that it helps to school we Americans, right? We're only 200 and something years old, and all of you represent cultures that come from cultures that are centuries, if not millennia old. And so, for instance, Dannilda, how many words are there for love in Spanish?
Te quiero, te amo, te adoro.
You see? And that's the wonderful thing, because there's just such a richness that we lack, which is why I think a global perspective about life and living is so important. And you all bring that. For instance, in Greek, there's agape, there's eros, is it philia? How many other ways can we say love? And they each mean different things, and they're so poignant in the ways they describe love. In German, my favorite word is Schadenfreude. I just, it's amazing, that word, it's just what it means. And so when we think about what you give us, the gift that you give us in this country.
There's a Greek word that I wanted to share just because you brought that up that I think is very applicable to this moment that we don't have in English. It's my new favorite word that my lovely coworker Katie Kaleitis recently taught me because I don't actually speak Greek, unfortunately. I'm gonna butcher the way that it's pronounced, but Charmolylpi? Oh God, it's so bad. Charmolylpi. And basically what it means is the sorrow in joy and the joy in sorrow as like a concept. And the way those two things are related to each other and the way you find joy in moments of sorrow and vice versa. The way Katie talks about it, she says, there's a reason Greeks dance at weddings, or I dance at funerals. I'm sorry. There's a reason Greeks dance at funerals and things like that. And I think that's been a really poignant concept to me in this particular moment.
I think in Western culture, modern Western culture, in America especially, we don't understand the difference between joy and happiness or euphoria, and we combine the two. But when you've lived on a continent for thousands of years, when you've endured wars that have destroyed your countries and your continent, when you've known suffering to a degree that we, frankly, Americans are very spoiled, then you begin to understand the nuance in emotion, in life, in existence, in being.
So that is one thing, actually, Steve, that is a little bit personal to me, because when I moved from the Caribbean to the Bronx, I moved to the Bronx in New York. I came as a teenager. I was 14 years old, and I actually moved in with my uncle and my aunt. And they trying to show me New York. We went to Times Square at night one day, and all of a sudden my uncle hit somebody by mistake, and he said sorry. And my uncle said, "I'm gonna give you one of the biggest lessons about living in the United States. For anything you do, all you have to do is say sorry." I don't know why, but Americans say sorry for everything. Just anything you do, you just say sorry, sorry, sorry. They will leave it at that. And I actually thought he was exaggerating. And in the Bronx, I live in a very Dominican community. So I really didn't feel like I left my culture because I spoke Spanish all the time. I went to school only with people also who were immigrants and, and when I left New York for the first time, like truly have my life outside of New York, I was so shocked at how often I heard the word sorry. And I was like, why do people say I'm sorry for almost anything? And then I realized is that in Spanish, we have maybe like 4 or 5 different ways of saying sorry, depending on the level. And to say that you really feel sorry is really extreme for us. But you will say like, excuse me, in so many different ways. Like if somebody hits you, you wouldn't be sorry. You would just say something around excuse me. So it's just very interesting that you bring that up because really for me it has been something huge to try to get adapted to, that sometimes I want to say excuse me, but I end up saying I'm sorry because it's the only thing that in English I feel like, okay, that's the only word that I'm supposed to use, etc. While in Spanish I'm used to so many words that I can just pick and choose depending on my feelings. So
well, as we wrap, I want to just talk about the city of Chicago because that's where we're all based, and you all come from different parts of the city. And as I said, you represent different cultures and neighborhoods. And so those of you who've had brick and mortar institutions, these institutions were built by Germans and Greeks and others for their purposes, for their sort of cultural memory. And over time, those peoples moved away. Or maybe the institution moved and then they moved again. And so where you are now, probably the majority of people who are around you aren't Greek, aren't Dominican, aren't, any number of ethnicities within our membership. And so talk about how you feel connected to the city now.
I think the work at the Bronzeville Historical Society is one of remembrance. I think like so many African Americans living in different neighborhoods across the country, there is a disconnection between your African ancestry. And so America is really the only country you've ever known. And for a lot of these communities, these are the first times that we get to develop our own origin stories out of the context of segregation, out of the context of slavery, and how we have imagined ourselves. And Bronzeville is one of those places where African Americans imagine themselves possible and dared to think of themselves as worthy, dignified citizens of this country and patriots of this country who wanted to contribute not only to their society, but to the development of Chicago. And I think where we are now, particularly in Bronzeville and other neighborhoods, it's about how do we ensure that everyday people who live in these neighborhoods get to know who have walked these streets, who've sang at these hotels and bars, who have frequent venues that are renowned around the world. And I think that's important to know, because the more you know about yourself, and this is particularly true about the African American community, the more we can have a greater sense of self-actualization. And that's so necessary for the development of our culture, for the development of our ability to develop healthy intercultural relationships, to be able to cultivate peace building, to be able to cultivate love for one's identity, for one's culture, and inevitably for one's patriotism and contribution to this country.
What's coming to my mind is, particularly this year for Peace Day, one of our goals was to help change the narrative of the city of Chicago, and not our own narratives. That we know who we are, right? We know who we are. You know, each one of us here together tonight, we know who we are. We know where we came from. We know what our community is, and we know we're Chicagoans. We know we're part of this city. And the image that most people see of Chicago is not the faces here, is not the communities we live in. It's not the connections that are already here and the connections that are being made. So one of our goals for Peace Day this year was to highlight organizations that are involved in peace building, community building, cultural organizations. And so Chicago Cultural Alliance has such an important role in our city, because these are community organizations. Museums are in communities throughout our city. It's not all centralized downtown. This is people all over our city. And the museums and the organizations that are part of CCA give people the opportunity to get to another neighborhood, to meet people there. And so, again, like coming back to Peace Day, peace is impossible if we don't get to know each other. And so we have great opportunity through the organizations that are part of this community of CCA to help people get to know other sides of our city. And there's so many organizations in our city working for something good, working for community, working for peace, working for justice. And the more we can get that out there, where people have an opportunity to see through the arts, through music, through dance, but through engagement, through discussion, through the stories, it makes a difference. Like we did this international conference. People got a really great experience of Chicago by seeing video of what we do on Peace Day, by hearing from some of our teenagers. We had 17-year-olds in there in conversation with a diplomat. We had another 17-year-old in there with all adults talking about community building.
Well, I was just blown away by the comments of Jennifer. I think that when thinking about the CCA, that is why I see it as an umbrella that unified so many neighborhoods of Chicago. Something about Chicago, I moved to the city 3 years ago. And, I growing up in another city, New York, I really imagined Chicago being just another New York, just located in a different place. But wow, I have also been blown away by Chicago, extremely different in its culture, the people, of course, the weather. You know, how Chicago is known to outsiders and what people think here of Chicago. And, you know, just like Jennifer mentioned, one really cool thing of being part of an organization that is part of the CCA is how diverse the CCA is and unify the city of Chicago, which is a really huge city. And like I said, in terms of the culture, very different from other cities and is very diverse. I mean, you go to different neighborhoods and it's almost like traveling throughout different cities, but it's just one. So really, that is something that it makes me, I want to say happy, but also maybe proud to see that an organization like the CCA exists and that can unify communities, because it is an organization that unify Chicago, which is huge and diverse in so many ways.
And you know you're in a big city like Chicago when you hear sirens in the background. So thank you so much.
And I live in the 15th floor, and you can hear.
That's right. Thank you so much, Daniella Carrero from DAMA, the Dominican American Midwest Association, and also Cairo Dai from the Hellenic Museum, Rosa Gallagher from Dankhaus, Jennifer Kim from the Peace School, and Mathew Holloway from the Bronzeville Historical Society. And you can hear more, find out more about these incredible organizations by going to the Chicago Cultural Alliance website at chicagoculturalalliance.org. Thank you all so much. It's been a real pleasure and a joy to have this experience with you all. And I wish you all peace, joy, love, and good health.